Welcome. Thank you for being here this evening. And I'm Lauren Cook. I am your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising at JCHS. Very excited to get us going with the class of 2024. I want to thank you first for tolerating a Zoom evening while we have gotten back to a lot of in-person events at JCHS. Wanted to actually keep this one online for access reasons, because I do think sometimes the commute to JCHS can be a barrier for some folks. And we're recording this because I know there's the end of basketball practice happening right now and all the rest. So to make sure that folks can watch this later if they're not able to attend live. So we'll make this as scintillating as possible. And a couple of other Zoom housekeeping items up top. Everyone's on mute. I'd ask you to stay that way for now. We hope to have some time for questions at the end, and we will probably use the chat box for that. I expect this to run an hour. I do want to honor everybody's time. So whether we are done with questions at 7:30 or not, we will close. But of course, you have access to me after tonight. So this will be a continuing conversation over the next year and a half. And you can always email me later, and we will have one-on-one meetings coming soon. We are recording this for folks unable to attend. And hopefully folks saw in your inboxes about half an hour ago, I sent out a PDF of the slides that I'll be using tonight. So if you do want to return to anything or take notes, you don't have to, but I wanted to just make those available to folks as we all take in information a little bit differently. So with that, this is the official launch of the college search process for our junior class. I think it's an exciting time. I always appreciate when the cycle clicks a little bit, and a lot of the seniors have their applications in now, and I'm able to turn my attention to you all. And this is a time, juniors, when you can start to really dream big about what's going to happen with your next step after JCHS. And if any of you, parents or students, are feeling like, oh, I can't believe it's time for college, I'm not ready for this yet, that's okay. No one's going to college yet, right? So we are starting a long-term project. We've got a good year and a half here together before we get to final decisions about where everyone's going to enroll. So think about this like a marathon, right? And we're going to have some stations we'll be hitting along the way. We'll stop for water refreshments, but this is a long-term project that we're going to just start to lay the groundwork on tonight. And I want to just name that everybody's process is going to look different. Students, you are all unique human beings. You're going to have different goals and aspirations for yourselves than one another. So I want to remind you now, and I'll be saying it lots, I said it to a senior today, to try and keep this process grounded in what you want and what you need, and not necessarily what your friends are doing or what the media tells you should value. This is your life, and this is a chance to start putting your hands on the steering wheel in a really meaningful way with it. Now, of course, a reminder that it's not just your hands on the steering wheel. You have got help with all of this. I mentioned this to juniors when we had a class meeting a week or two ago, that I want you to think about having a team with the college search process. Obviously, your parents may be on it. You're going to have some professional community members on it, as you have folks writing recommendation letters for you. You may be asking for some advice, some trusted friends you might want to talk about your college list or share writing with. And of course, you're in charge, you're the captain of the team, but I will be coaching you along the way, if we can get more into the sports metaphor. So over the next year and a half, we have a couple of goals. The first one is going to be to reflect on yourself and your time at JCHS. Think about what has gone well, what you might want to have happen differently in your next academic home. So really doing some deep thinking and reflection about yourself. And then find options that fit that vision for yourself. And I want to pull over here for a moment and just remind everybody, there's lots of options for what will happen after JCHS. For some students, that may be community college, that may be enlisting in the IDF, that may be taking a gap year. The majority of our students pursue a four-year college experience, if not immediately, at some point after graduation. So that's why we are focusing on that most specifically tonight, and it is the most involved and intricate process. But there are all of these options, and they are all valuable and useful to different students. But once we've got some options for yourself after graduation, then in the spring of your senior year, hopefully we're choosing between multiple good options and figuring out what's really the best fit. So that is our long-term goal. Big picture, but we're going to do this in bite-sized chunks. And I'm always here as a resource for you as we're going through all of this. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the very first steps we're going to be doing in the next few weeks, laying the groundwork for all of this. And we have got already in the room our colleague and friend Bruce Reed, who's going to zero in on the testing portion of this process, because that is something that is continuing to evolve. He's the co-founder and executive director of the Compass Education Group, and they're a great partner to JCHS. And then I'm going to come back and have a few comments and wrap up things. And hopefully we'll have 10 or 15 minutes for some questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, yeah, I think we've got everyone out of the rating room. Amazing. If you're just joining us, welcome. And we'll get some slides going here. So, this is junior college night. Okay. So step one, as I just indicated to all of you, you might think the first step is to like jump into a list of colleges, but the first step is actually to jump into you, right? Who are you? And what is it you might be looking for as you figure out some criteria for your college list? So there are thousands of colleges to choose from in the world. And if we don't have kind of a rubric or a list of priorities about things that you're looking for, it's really hard to winnow down choices and make a really good decision. So one framework I like to think about are these 5 I's. And these come from this book called The College Conversation. I have a photo of this in the back of the handbook, along with a couple of other trusted college resources that I think are great to look at. But these 5 questions, I think, really distill down an inventory of the things that might be important for you in your next academic home. So thinking about your identity, what's important to you? Do you want to have a strong Jewish community where you're going? Thinking about intellectually, where do you learn best? Is it small classrooms? Is it one-on-one attention? Is it a more lecture style situation? What values and opinions are important to you? Who do you want to be surrounded by? And what are the kind of ethics and values that either that institutions or your peers might be espousing? How do you spend your free time? You know, is rock climbing your thing and you got to have a climbing wall at the school you're going to? Like, think about how you want to spend your free time when you're not studying. And then, you know, what motivates you? Who do you admire? Who do you want to be surrounded by to really get the most out of your experience and feel sort of energized and inspired? So again, these are all in your inbox in that slide list, so you can think about them. But as you consider these questions, I would really encourage you to like keep a journal going, to open a Google Doc and really explore those sort of 5 I questions. And you're not thinking specifically about colleges, you're thinking about attributes here, right? That might be important to you. And after that, later this evening, actually at around 8 p.m., everyone is going to be getting a college advising questionnaire in your inbox. And I'll talk about this more thoroughly in a moment, but this is a way for me to get to know you and for you to express some early thoughts about your college process. So thinking about the 5 I questions is going to help inform that questionnaire and giving some really thoughtful answers. Again, more on that later. And then you also have a tool in SCORE. I know all of you are in SCORE, and some of you have started noodling around with this because I think I mentioned it in the fall as well. There is a series of games called You Science, and it's literally like the science of you, thinking about how your brain works. It takes about 2 hours to do, and it spits out some results for you that are going to list things like potential career matches you might have aptitude for, what majors lead to those careers, and then what colleges offer those majors, you know, in a really meaningful and strong way. So these are some of the first steps I want you to start thinking about over the next few weeks as we're trying to brainstorm what your list of priorities are going to be. The next step is then to really be thinking about fit, because that is our mission as we're trying to think about a list of colleges for you to start exploring and researching. And I say this every year, and of course, not everyone is able to absorb it, but this is not about associating yourself with name brands. You know, this is about institutions that are going to be a next academic home for you. It's not about following your best friend. It's not about following a boyfriend or girlfriend. You know, this is about centering yourself and being a little selfish in this choice and thinking about what's going to be a good fit for you for 4 years. So again, there are some factors to think about what might be a good college fit. Academically, obviously, does the college offer the right opportunities that you're looking for? Socially, are you going to have a fulfilling social life, have fun? Can you pay for it? And can you get in? Those first two questions are a little bit more, you can find a lot of information on that and answers on that pretty clearly. These second two are a little trickier, a little harder to predict. So how do you figure this out? Well, I'm going to be encouraging you to do some research over the next few weeks and months. And so that can look like any number of things. There's all sorts of college resources, but three of the ones I really want you to start with, and I certainly trust the most, are SCORE. There's a great search function in SCORE. You can do a lot of following of colleges. It acts very much like social media and collect some basic information about schools. There's also a great website called Big Future, which is a product of the College Board, the folks that do the AP and SAT and all that. It has all sorts of filters and ways that you can search on different colleges to also generate names of places you might not have heard of before, might not be on your radar screen. And then I am a big fan of the FIS Guide to Colleges. I have like 15 of these in my office. If you ever want to come in and sign one out, take it home with you, a little light reading on colleges. They're very third-party descriptions of colleges. So this is not PR that comes from colleges. So I feel like you can get kind of a snapshot and a vibe of a place differently than the marketing that you might be receiving from a college itself. So starting with some of these resources to learn a little bit about schools and those answers to fit questions. And then I'm going to make some suggestions to all of you after we meet for the first time. So I'm going to be trying to marry what you're telling me about yourself and these priorities you might have for yourself with what I know about institutions out there where some of our students are happy. And so looking at some of those as well. And then as we get into the spring and summer, to start visiting campuses, whether that be doing some things virtually online or physically going somewhere, getting yourself on some mailing lists. And I know a lot of you were great about coming to college visits at JCHS this past fall, and those will of course happen again during your senior year. All right, so I want to return to those 4 factors of fit for a moment. Because again, we have those tricky last questions. Get my PowerPoint working here. The quick, tricky last question of, can you get in? And I want to be clear as we think about admission to college. Right now, the national average of an acceptance rate to colleges in the US is 68%. Okay, so the majority of colleges in the US admit the majority of students that apply. So for most institutions, this is not really a deep question, can you get in? There are, of course, 50 to 100, some schools that have teeny tiny selection, rates. They're outliers in the grand scheme of things, but because we are human, we focus on them, right? And so to understand your chances of admission at these outlier schools, I want to talk a little bit about what's considered for admission so you understand how admission decisions are made in kind of a larger generic way. So what's in an application? This is kind of a complete list of factors that would be in a college application. This is kind of like the most that a college would ask for from you. This is a list that a lot of private colleges might be looking at. If you're thinking about a University of California school, for example, they are not asking for test scores, for recommendation letters, for interviews. So this can vary a little bit depending on the school, but this is a more exhaustive list. Understand that I go through each of these things with students individually. I provide support with essay writing, with testing advice, collecting recommendation letters, prepping for interviews. And I want to pause on this last one, expression of interest. I've mentioned this a little bit in my emails about going to college visits at JCHS and showing demonstrated interest for some schools. Again, not every college cares about this. The UCs don't care about demonstrated interest, but there are some schools that are tracking the way in which you've engaged with them. So whether you've been on a campus tour, whether you've opened an email from them, and these things as they stack up may make them more likely to admit you. So it is a factor at some institutions and feels like it's important for you to at least be aware that that's out there. And we can talk more if some of these schools are on your list. But big picture, these are all factors that you basically control, right? Like you have created your transcript, you will do your writing, you will take tests, etc. Sometimes students talk about this process being a little random, or like, this person got in and this person didn't, and it makes no sense to me. It is not a random process. When folks speak about it like that, it's a sign to me that they don't understand that there are priorities, sometimes people call them hooks in the college process, that are an additional set of criteria, often beyond your control, the colleges are also taking into consideration. And they would be things that look like this. So we know that there are some colleges spending a lot of time and money to recruit really powerful athletes. Sometimes if you have had a sibling or a parent, and those tend to be the family members they care about the most, attend that school, that can give you some preference in the process. Talk about development cases. If your family can buy a building at the school, fair or not, that sometimes plays a role. Highly selective colleges remain still pretty overwhelmingly white. So if you're bringing something else to the table in terms of your race or ethnicity, that can provide you some preference. If you're first generation in your family to go to college, or if you fall into, and this is a big category, but schools have their own specific priorities depending on what's happening on that campus. So they might not have any students from North Dakota. And so that one applicant from North Dakota is going to get a lot of special attention. They might need a tuba player in the orchestra. They might have a new data science department. They're trying to fill majors. So we will review these sort of factors and priorities that might be individual to you, if you have any. And you can also ask colleges about this, especially with the school-specific priorities. They are usually pretty transparent about, here are some of the folks that we're looking for this year. And these things will help us have a better sense of if you can get in and if you can pay for it, because there may be money attached to some of these priorities, right? So it's what's in your application, plus sometimes these institutional hooks or priorities. All right, so we've talked sort of theoretically about doing a personal inventory, emphasizing fit. Now for the nuts and bolts of what's actually happening with your next steps. So as I said, you are going to get questionnaires in your inboxes tonight around 8 o'clock. These are optional for parents. It is always so great to hear from you. So if you have the time to do it, terrific. I really want to have your voice and input early on here as we're laying this groundwork. They are required for students. So you cannot sign up for your first college advising meeting with me until I've received the questionnaire from you. The student questionnaires ask, some pretty general questions about who are you, what are you interested in, what have you been involved with at JCHS, what's your experience been like at JCHS, what are you thinking about for your future? If you have specific ideas, great. If you have no idea, great. Just answer the questions as best you can. And parent questions are more like, do you have aspirations, certain aspirations for your kids? Are there schools that are important to your family? Are there contextual things you feel like I should know? You obviously have had the longest experience with your children, and so it's really important to have you weigh in. It's a chance for students to be reflective, help me get to know you. But as I emphasized at our class meeting 2 weeks ago, this is also the beginning of your college advising recommendation letter. So I write a recommendation letter. It's required by most schools for every student in the class. So if you give me one-word answers, one-sentence answers, you're not helping me help you. So please be thorough, take some time with this. And once we get those questionnaires in, I will send a sign-up sheet out as I receive them for you to sign up for a chance to meet with me. These will be one-on-one first with just me and the student, and then we'll have opportunities later if the whole family wants to get together. I'll be doing these appointments all throughout December and January. So during study halls, after school, if you don't have a study hall, there will be lots of slots for students to choose from. And we will talk in those meetings about your questionnaire, about SCORE and how to sort of best use this resource as we're going through the college admission process. We'll talk about practice tests. We're getting closer to the testing conversation here. The recent results you got back, and I can give you some advice on what I think you should do, whether we're staying on the testing train, and if so, ACT, SAT, what's the best route for you, or whether we think testing might not be a part of your process. That is something that we can consider at this point. And then after that meeting, usually the same day, I try and do it within 24 hours, I will put an initial college list for you in SCORE. If you have no schools in SCORE, this will be your initial college list. If you do have some schools already that you're following, I'm just going to try and round that out a little bit with some other suggestions that I think you should have on your radar screen. And then after that, I really want to encourage folks to start doing this research, joining mailing lists, going on at least some virtual visits, and starting to get a sense of things that are clicking with you, things that aren't working for you, so we can then start to refine that list and toss places that aren't a good match and maybe add some new ones that might be better attuned for you. All right, so I'm going to pause there on the big picture and stop sharing my screen for a moment, and bring in Bruce Reed here, who is one of the nation's leading experts on standardized testing research and higher education trends. In 2004, he co-founded the Compass Education Group. They are a test prep and academic support company that's an amazing partner to high schools like all over the country, but JCHS in particular, we've had a lot of happy families working with them. And Bruce in particular is a really invaluable resource on this, so we are very lucky to have him with us again tonight. And I'm going to see if I can spotlight Bruce, but hopefully you can at least see him. There we go. Spotlight for everyone. All right.
All right.
So hopefully folks were able to watch a Compass webinar, as I encouraged in advance of our meeting this evening, to just get a little bit of background on what's happened with the testing landscape. There have been a lot of changes since the pandemic. So Bruce, I want to start it just by asking you, what have we seen play out in terms of trends and outcomes since we've had this big upsurge in test optional policies?
Yeah, we're sort of in, and thanks for having me, by the way. It's good to be back. It's I think I was trying to count back. It's been about 10 or 12 years since we've been doing this together, and I do enjoy it. But I think it's year 3 that we've been doing this virtually, which means it's sort of year 3 of the test optional wave that upended the testing industry, at least a few years ago, along with many other aspects of our lived experience. You made a sports metaphor earlier. I'll take your cue. I made this comparison earlier today that it feels like testing was, 3 years ago, it was like a star athlete had a season-ending injury and was just out for the season. So class of 21, the current sophomores, they just got, their testing world just got ground to a halt, and the show must go on. And they figured out the marketplace understood how to sort of do that without test scores. Last year, that athlete was kind of rehabbing and making its way back. Now I think testing is back, but it kind of feels like watching an athlete after an injury, right? Maybe has kind of lost a step. Certainly not back to pre-pandemic levels, and I'm not sure we'll ever see that return, meaning participation rates. So you talk about trends. When I think about trends, I kind of think of the testing world as kind of a marketplace. There's 2 sides to the market, and it works when there's sufficient supply and sufficient demand. So the demand comes from colleges, and there's trends going on that side of the equation. We'll talk about sort of what's happening on the admissions side. And then there are trends on the student side, on the supply side. How many scores are they supplying? Well, we know that number is down. Just to put it into some perspective, pre-pandemic, if you look back at like Common App data, which is really good national sort of holistic data, if you took the entire universe of the Common App pool, let's say in 2019, maybe 80% of students were submitting test scores somewhere. In the first year of the pandemic, that plummeted to about 50% or below 50%. And then it started to inch back up last year to about 60%. This year, we're probably going to see it in the low 60s or so. And like I said, we're probably never going to get back to those pre-pandemic levels. So colleges are now dealing with this new normal that they've agreed to, right? That many schools claimed that they were going to go test optional temporarily. It was a temporary workaround to an existential problem. But now we're seeing them kind of take their time in coming back. So we're not seeing a lot of colleges come back to fully requiring test scores. There are a few notable ones that have done so. MIT made a lot of news a couple of months ago, very unapologetically and very kind of evidence-based, made a claim that it made sense for them to return to requiring test scores. Georgetown would be another big name. the state of Florida public schools, state of Georgia public schools. So that's sort of one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme would be the test-free schools you mentioned here in California. That feels prominent because the public school systems here test-free. So we've seen, testing go to zero in the public school system in California, but we've also seen applications skyrocket. And that's another trend, another sort of corresponding, I don't want to say unintended consequence, but just inevitable consequence to suspending testing. Because in some ways, when you take testing either out of the equation or you make it discretionary, it gets pitched as this benefit. And I think at the high level, it can be seen as, broadly speaking, a liberating option for students to now have choice or just, opt out of that choice. But choice does come with it some burden, right? So now there's this burden of choice. What if I make the wrong choice? How do I read into these optional policies? So that's, I think, added some confusion, and I think even some cognitive dissonance for students who simultaneously feel more hopeful and more fearful. So they're more hopeful in the sense that, gosh, maybe I will get accepted to this college now that I don't need to satisfy test score expectations. That's the hopeful side of the equation. The fearful side of it is, oh, but gosh, isn't everybody else thinking that as well? And isn't there going to now be more competition? And isn't it going to be harder to kind of distinguish? So we're seeing a little bit about that. I agree with you that college admission decisions are not random, but I will say they've become less predictable in the last few years, especially in the UC system.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And so I think it begs the question, how do I know if I should test and then if I should send scores,
Right.
If that makes sense for me. And I know, I had a big argument with a family last year where they had a test score in the 1500s, is ostensibly a great test score, but whether to submit it or not, because it was a highly, highly, highly selective school. So what kind of, what insight can you give us on that question?
That's the big question. I would have sent the 1500. I don't care where you're talking about, but and I say that seriously, and I'll get back to that in a second, because let me say a few things about this question. First of all, you kind of asked a two-part question: should I test, and should I submit? Let's take the first one. There are valid reasons not to test, but I would really kind of invert the question and ask it the other way. Why should I not test? What is the strong case to just forego testing right now? Mm-hmm. If you just look at decision-making rationale, if you're just dealing with like an abstract path through a series of decisions, I could argue that the more prudent decision to the big early one, the big binary one, is to choose the path that keeps more options open later, right? So yes, there is a cost benefit to testing, and yes, it may prove to be a futile exercise. Look, I went through all this work and I did prep and practice and I took the test and then I ended up not using it. What a waste of time. I'm not sure it's a waste of time, because at the time it made sense to keep those options open. And then you may have decided at the end not to submit scores. And that's fine, but at least you retained that option. So I think all things being equal, I would encourage students to keep more options open and make those decisions in a year, because those decisions are more fine-grained. You'll have more information about individual scenarios. You'll get more input from folks like you, Lauren, who can say, look, I have some insight here in this particular case. It's very situational. But without test scores, you're kind of making all those decisions, go away. So the first part of it is, unless you really have a strong reason to avoid testing altogether, I would probably continue to keep testing open and keeping that option open and obtain a test score at some point along the way. Once you get to the decision-making, the submission stage, that's the part where there's a lot of hand-wringing. And that's kind of an unfortunate consequence of this. I don't think it was meant to turn into a strategy. It certainly was not meant to be like a strategic riddle to solve. It was, again, a temporary makeshift concession that was necessary during an existential crisis. The machinery broke down and colleges had no choice but to say, look, we know many of you just don't have test scores. You literally physically can't obtain them. So you can't fulfill the requirement. Therefore, we can't hold this requirement over your head. Now they've lingered and they haven't really gone back to requiring test scores for a lot of self-serving reasons. Colleges have seen a lot more applications, which they like. They've seen a more diverse applicant pool, which they like. So I think you can assume many of your schools are going to remain test optional in a year, but I don't think you need to be afraid of sharing test scores with them, especially if they are, if it feels like a really close call. That is probably a sign that it's a good enough score to share. And the reason I say that is because if it's that close, and we know what close is, we can look at, and I'll give you some parameters in a second, but if it feels like a score that's right on the cusp of should I send or shouldn't I, it's probably going to either help you or be a neutral, but it's not going to be devastatingly bad if it's that close. If it's way out of line, then it's probably not a hard decision and you don't send it. But if it's borderline competitive or competitive, I think you owe it to yourself to make the job easier for the readers to just feel that extra layer of certainty. Because what we've seen is, and this is kind of unfortunate, and it's not what colleges intended to do, but we have seen anecdotal evidence that shows a higher admission rate among those who submit than those who do not submit to certain schools. We're talking about a relatively small subset of schools, and I'm not suggesting it was the scores that got them in, but I am suggesting there's a correlation that may have just been a combination of implicit bias, unintentional bias, old habits, readers who have grown up doing this for 20, 25 years, familiar with test scores. So I believe them when they say, we're not disadvantaging those who don't send scores, but I'm not sure they even realize that they may be advantaging students who have very strong scores, because you can't unsee it. And when you see that 1,500, which those colleges should have seen in that case, it's still a strong score, just like it was pre-pandemic. So there's this fear that, like, gosh, everybody is kind of playing game theory here, and only the strongest scores are going to be seen, and therefore mine is going to look relatively inferior. That's not really how it's seen. A strong score is still a strong score. So whatever connotation was assigned to a 1,400 3 years ago is being assigned today. It still means the same thing. So you're never going to get anyone who absolutely knows the empirically correct answer to this question, because there's just not one. But I would not overthink this one. And all things being equal, I would probably lean into sending scores if they're close.
That is super helpful. And we have many bridges to cross before we get to this moment with all of you on making these decisions, but know that I'm obviously here to bounce questions off of. So one issue that still persisted for this year's senior class was whether they could actually get a test sitting at a site, because there's still been, high pent up demand to be able to test. So do you have any thoughts or predictions on test site availability for the class of 2024 as we get into next year?
So full disclosure, I have a class of 2024 daughter in my household, and we have already signed up for test dates because, and it's a good idea to get that task accomplished relatively soon, even if you don't have all of your exact testing plans figured out. Get that reservation. It's kind of like get that hotel room held when you know you're traveling somewhere on a popular day. Having said that, it's gotten a lot better. It was really rough a few years ago. You probably have friends or older siblings, people were facing decisions to fly out of state to find a test site, or they were driving to Reno or driving to LA or something. It has improved. Part of that is because the market has kind of adjusted. So there are fewer test takers than there were pre-pandemic. There are fewer test sites, but the balance is starting to kind of restore itself. Having said that, I still think there is the risk of waiting too long and then realizing that there's not an available seat really close by. and then trying to register last minute, and now you're looking at Sacramento or something. So I would probably get on that pretty soon. I don't suggest that you hoard sites or hoard seats and try to sign up for 6 seats just so you have them all, but make some sensible targets and pick, 1 or 2 test dates in the next several months and have a couple of those held if you need them. And then if you don't need them, I think it's College Board allows you to cancel and maybe get a refund or a mostly refund. I don't think ACT lets you get your money back, but they let you trade for a later date and sort of change things around.
Thank you. Terrific. So now we'll get into more of Compass's wheelhouse. What are your thoughts on options for prepping for the test, preparing for the test, getting familiar with the test, best practices you might share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I am a test prep person. I run a test prep company. I believe I see the benefits of prep. I think the definition of prep it should be fairly broad. I'm not suggesting that there's only one way to do it or one place to do it. I think it's like any other form of preparation, whatever you're preparing for that matters to you, that is high stakes. You can conquer it, you can get better at it. It is skill-based, but it takes work. And it's the same sort of thing that goes into getting better at public speaking, getting more fluent on the piano, getting just more comfortable with discomfort, uncomfortable motions and movements and so forth. So no matter how you pursue prep, I first of all, I do strongly suggest you invest some intentionality into taking these tests seriously. It will pay off for you. How you define intentionality is up to you. That can be self-prep. That can be quasi-guided prep, maybe some online courses or guided tutorials. You could join a group class. You can do one-on-one tutoring. So, and Compass offers the latter two. We do want a lot of one-on-one tutoring. I don't even know if I told you, Lauren, but now we are actually offering small group classes to the general public this spring. We've always offered classes to, sort of privately to certain partner high schools. This year, we'll have some information. I can actually get it for you in the chat later, but we'll have some classes for the spring ACT and spring SAT classes. These will be, 8-week sort of once a week sort of thing. But no matter where you do prep or how you do it, the best practices that you asked about. So most of the gains come from the substance. So the substance is content mastery. Now the content on these tests doesn't go deep, it just goes broad. It's a survey of a lot of things they've assumed you've acquired and accumulated over your high school career up until now. So these are sort of normed for juniors. They are the classic sort of reading, writing, and math skills. But it's a standardized test. So every question is either completely right or all the way wrong. So it is a test of precision. It's a test of focus, accuracy, discipline, cognitive control, clock control, managing your time, managing your decision-making, remaining kind of emotionally controlled. So there's some real hard skills, like, do I know my grammar inside and out? Do I know my geometry and my quadratics and my polynomials inside and out? Can I balance equations all day long? Do I know my angles? Do I know my trig functions? That stuff is where you really dig yourself out of trouble. And then the soft skills, confidence, focus, attention, and some of that can be practiced. It can be practiced in the way in which you approach it. Are you consistent enough in hitting the drills? Do you do practice testing? Do you set up an environment in your home where you can focus? Are you disciplined to turn off devices and deep dive? Because these tests are well made, meaning that they are built to be, they're stubborn. They need to be convinced that you have changed what you're doing in order to yield higher scores to you. Otherwise, you'll kind of continue to see the same results because these are standardized and consistently built. So hard questions are hard questions. You need to change to understand what make those questions accessible if they're holding you back from your target scores. So yeah, that's kind of prep in a nutshell, but I think a measured dose and a reasonable amount of time spent in the weeks leading up to a test date makes some sense.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I will be pushing out various offers and things that come into the class over the next few weeks as we have them made available to us at JCHS. Bruce also put in the chat a really, really helpful guidebook. It's a link to the virtual Compass Guide. I've got mine right here too, just came in the mail. This book is so helpful, and this is a free resource that you could use from Compass. It's one reason I love Compass is they do a lot of things just, ad hoc for the greater good. But of course,
and that was the book that you would have gotten at the door if we were doing this in an auditorium. That's the handout to tonight. So that book really has a lot of the fine-grained detail, a lot of the facts and figures and college data, important test dates, sample questions for SAT and ACT. So you would have gotten that if we were doing this live. So I wanted you to have a digital version of it. And I actually like the digital version of it because then you can kind of keep it on your tablet and just, it navigates really nicely. And there's a table of contents in the front because I don't expect you to read it cover to cover, but there might be some select pages in there that you're like, yep, that's what I need information on. While we're doing links here, I'll just pop in. That's just the link if people want just basic information to some of the group classes that we were talking about earlier. And then there's one-on-one tutoring that you could reach out to us if that's something you want to learn more about.
Terrific. So I'm going to take the spotlight off of you for a moment, Bruce, as we do a little final wrap up here before we then open it up for questions for both of us. But I do just want to name that, and I'm going to go back to the sharing my screen. I do just want to name that PSAT results will come out for the class, I think, on Monday. And so if you took the mock ACT, you should have gotten your results from Compass on that. The PSAT will come out on Monday, and then we will be able to, again, Compass has a great resource, I think, in the book and on their website where you can look and see if you did markedly better in terms of your score on one test or another. It's often more granular than that. And so we can have a conversation about if, one test sort of felt better, more intuitive to you than other, the pacing is different, the content's a little different. But we will need to be choosing so that you can get a test spot, at least one, if not two, registered here. We need to be choosing between SAT or ACT in the next few weeks. So once we get those results back on Monday, if I end up meeting with you as a student during December, we can talk during our meeting about that, but I'm also happy to field email questions with my advice if you would like to get that process rolling earlier. If you're going to test, I do suggest that folks try and get out there and do it twice before we get fully into the fall of senior year. You certainly can test in October, maybe November, and have it still play a role in your process during senior year, but it's better to front load and try and do it this spring or over the summer if possible. Again, you want to think about how you're going to prepare for the test. So we can talk about prepping options as well, everything from free stuff with Khan Academy to, doing one-on-one tutoring with a place like Compass. Registering early will be important, especially if you honor Shabbat. It's gotten better, the Sunday testing options. It used to be very sort of competitive to get a seat there. They're have opened them up a bit more, but it is still important if you want to test on Sunday to get those registrations in the next few weeks. And then if you have testing accommodations, to talk with Dr. Neufeld to see if they're updated, if he has the materials he needs so that once you register for a test, it will bump some information to him to fill out for you to try and get you approved for those accommodations. So that's kind of your follow-up checklist on standardized tests. Okay, before we totally wrap up here, I want to just acknowledge that parents often ask me, well, what's my role here? And if you weren't going to ask me that, I'm going to just offer some advice anyway. So there's a list of dues that I want you to just think about here. We will have a timeline to be thinking about. I'm going to send a lot of reminders. I am here to sort of make sure we have a sense of the big picture timeline, but for you to also have an eye on this will be important. to think about being a bit of a travel agent for your child. You have the credit card and the family calendar to understand when you could go visit a physical college campus, over the summer or whatnot. So to get some of those arrangements made would be great. To obviously help with some registering for testing. Again, your credit card is going to be used a bit as we get through this process. So helping fill out some of the paperwork there. To actively engage in the conversation around financing. I know that some families find this so overwhelming that they ignore it for a little bit. Some have been very planful and are locked in and all of that, but please engage. I can do a lot of things for you in this process, but I cannot pay your your college tuition bill. So I will be sending out lots of resources. And in fact, I just booked a financial aid night for us in March, where you're going to get a lot of great information. But please attend to those things. It is important that you engage and know what you're doing here so that we don't have panic next fall. And then to please fact check where you're getting your admission information. If you hear or read something that you find particularly alarming, check with me, because chances are good that someone is trying to make some money or whatnot off of your stress and anxiety around this process. There's a lot of white noise around it that you can get very caught up in easily. It's natural, but please always check in with me to find out if some information feels a little strange or off, and I can try and help verify, hopefully calm down some of that. And then I would also just note that there is a kind of white line in this process, and there are white line violations. So I do want to close on these. Please try not to talk about college all the time. That can be an impulse that will come up, especially after this evening. And I don't want things to be chaotic in your household for the last year and a half that you're all living together. So think about if there are containers you can put this conversation in, whether it's, an hour on Sunday nights every other week or whatnot, to talk to family members about how, holiday dinners may not be time to sit down and ask all about the plans for next year, that we want to engage with and celebrate and lift up all the other parts of the end of high school beyond just this process. Please do not contact colleges on your child's behalf beyond doing something like setting up a visit. So you should not be getting real buddy-buddy with the college rep for JCHS and asking all sorts of esoteric questions about housing and all the rest. That's where your child should be doing that kind of engagement and developing those relationships. Colleges want to see the kids being invested and to be moving into a bit of an independent and adult space when interacting with them. If you go on a campus tour, please don't be more memorable than your child. Do not hijack the tour guide's time. I see this over and over as I go visit college campuses. So let them sort of take the lead, let other students take the lead, and sort of maintain some appropriate distance as you're trying to engage and get information as well. And then it should go without saying, but please don't please don't write, type, or submit applications on behalf of your child. This is a rite of passage they need to go through. And if they are struggling at any point next fall with getting that done, then we might need to have a conversation around, is this the right time to be moving on to this next independent step? Or do we have some other options we want to be thinking about, gap year and all the rest, until they're in a place where this is something that they're able to manage in a quasi-independent way with some mild support. Okay, so with that, I'm going to just recap our to-do list here. There are questionnaires coming. We're going to do some internal inventory. We're going to be working on a testing plan. We're going to research colleges once they're out there, and we are going to attempt to enjoy the rest of junior year while we're doing all of this. So these are our goals for the moment. And with exactly 10 minutes left, oh my gosh, I'm so proud. We can do some chats, and I have some questions in the chat here. First one is asking what virtual visits are like. Yes, that's a great question. I should have elaborated more on that. Virtual visits really sprung up and got a lot better, as you can imagine, during the pandemic. So a lot of colleges have had some kind of virtual online tour. But now some of them are like recorded with tour guides, like on skateboards, doing cool tricks to keep you interested as they take you around campus. Some of them are interactive with 360-degree, Zoom things you can do. And a lot of times there are live info sessions that you also can be sitting in where you hear from an admission rep, maybe some students, and learn some basics about the college, its mission, and hear from students about their experiences. So these happen in a variety of ways, but usually it's like a Zoom seminar kind of style thing. So you're not even always on the screen. You can just sort of passively take some stuff in and then like go on the tour. So they can be really helpful to just get a sense of things before you commit the time and the dollars to physically go to the campus space. There's a question about, and I think this is test prep, between free and paid services for test prep. And I think I'm going to also want, obviously, Bruce to chime in on this. But I will say part of this starts with just like what your family's resources are and what early practice test results look like, because sometimes students are coming in with some pretty high scores out the gate, and we're just trying to, do a little repetition and practice, and a Khan Academy, resource, or getting a test prep book from College Board, practice a couple of SATs may be good enough. But for some students, and Bruce, I'll turn it to you, some more intensive work could be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, Khan's really good, actually. So Khan, if you've ever used Khan Academy for anything, I think you kind of know what it is. It's no frills, but it's solid and it's free. And it's the mission behind what Sal's done is really cool. And then he got tapped by the College Board's president a few years ago to become the official partner of College Board. So Khan has kind of the inside track from the College Board to be the platform for free SAT information, really. So it's really a great repository for just raw access to practice material. A company like Compass adds this instructional element, right? So it's instructor-led. If it's group instruction, it's a group instructor. If it's private tutoring, it's going to be you and a tutor focusing and really having more of a Socratic, interactive, instructor-led learning experience. And then there's just kind of the structure, the macro structure around a course and a regimen and the accountability that goes with that. So there are assignments, there are practice tests, there are expectations, there is, sort of a give and take, as opposed to Khan. You've got to get in the gym and do the push-ups. But push-ups in the gym are good if you do them.
So this is another bit of conversation we can have in that first meeting or two to talk about what might be best for the student's working style. As Bruce said, can you self-regulate enough to go and do your own test prep and make your own framework for it? Or would it be helpful if you had a bit of coaching and, some parameters and framework around what you need to do?
I'll add one more detail. There's really no downside to at least checking Khan out, because like I said, there's no barrier to entry there. And I want to say that correct me if I'm wrong on this, Lauren, but I think now that the way PSAT scores come back, I guess I'll learn this myself in a couple of days when my daughter gets her scores back. They come to the student by email. You don't get, in the old days, you used to get like a big envelope in the mail and you'd rip it open and you'd look at your little big PSAT score report. Now you get an email. It's kind of uneventful. If your kid doesn't check email, it's like, didn't even know it came. But I want to say you get a digital report, and that report kind of invites you to upload it into a Khan account. And then, I think the PSAT is going to sort of encourage you to at least check out Khan anyway. So I think that's probably going to be part of what you at least look at initially. And then if that's not sufficient, you can kind of go to the next step.
Yeah, great. There is another question in the chat about, are there schools where going to JCHS is considered a plus? And will you also provide advice on schools where being Jewish can be challenging, i.e. BDS and all the rest? So yes. I will say, I think just by virtue of the fact that we always have 75 or 100 colleges each year requesting to come visit JCHS, where like we have a senior class of 44 right now, so I do. And I was a college rep for 18 years for a selective liberal arts college. And I was the JCHS rep for 12 of those. Very much made it a point to be a stop when I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I do think folks know that we're a great school, that we've got a really great community of not just, strong scholars, but, the mensch factory thing is real. I think they know you're also getting like good people to come be on your college campus. So yes, we are out there on the college radar screen, but it's also why when I'm not at school and I'm off at conferences and things, it's because I am also being the public face of JCHS to college side colleagues. I do absolutely provide advice as well as lots of resources as we think about what it means to be Jewish on different college campuses. And I will say that, halal.org is a really great resource, and they produce a lot of data just about where there are high percentages of Jews. That doesn't always tell you about the climate on the campus, but at least can tell you where there's going to be critical mass and volume. The Orthodox Union also has on their website, a list of, I think, 29 schools that they find all to be really highly approved. I'm also keeping just an eye on what's happening nationally in the news. There's some stuff this fall with the University of Vermont, for example, where we do have students applying and interested, and they've got a sizable Jewish population, but there was some anti-Semitic behavior that was enough that the Department of Justice has opened up an inquiry into what's happening on campus. So as I am aware of these things, and as these schools may or may not be on your students' radar screen, we can talk about it. So that is absolutely an important part of the process. And I do, as I instruct and welcome college visitors to our campus, along with telling them how to park at JCHS, I tell them they should talk about several things as relates to the Jewish population on campus, to kosher dining options, to student groups, climate, environment, all of that. And so most of our reps come in really prepped for tough questions, and boy, did they get them this fall. So our students are also not shy about asking about these things as well. So. Thank you, Bruce. Not a big deal in the higher ed world. Okay, I don't see other questions in the chat. I'm going to name that it is 2 minutes before 7:30. Does anyone else, you can throw it in the chat right now if there's any other burning questions, but I'm going to encourage you to please in half an hour, check your email and you will get a link to your questionnaire. If you lose it, if you delete it, if you don't do it tonight, I'm going to send it out again until I, get responses from all of you. And know that you are always welcome to email me with any questions. I do have a Google Calendar online. There's always a link to it in my email signature. And I'm really excited to begin this journey with all of you. Some of the families are new to me. Some of y'all are repeat visitors. So I'm excited about that too. And I think we will call it an evening without any other questions. So thank you so much for being here. And I will try and get a recording out by the end of the week if you just want to watch it again. So have a good night.